A cloudy Memorial Day. Well, we of course know that it's Memorial Day. It's hard to believe we're here already, and but nonetheless, time keeps flying, and time will keep flying. Before you know it, the summer will be over. But nonetheless, Memorial Day tends to mark for a lot of people what the beginning of summer really looks like. I know for the kids who are counting down the last days or half days left of their school year, they see summer here right very quickly on the horizon. And of course that means a change for a lot of people. Sometimes it's a change in terms of maybe your work schedule, or maybe you have some travel plans, and it seems like maybe things are going to open up a little more this summer. People are going to be able to do a little bit more of those kind of things. But when we think about Memorial Day, it's not, not just a celebration. I think in our society, in our culture today, it's become, well, this is the time to have a picnic and cook some hamburgers and go do your thing and get a 3-day weekend, maybe open the pool or whatever you're going to do. But it's more than that, and I think we need to take some time not just to reflect on what it is we need to remember as a nation, but always take some time to think about what God has for us in His Word. So Memorial Day, we take time to remember. Of course, as a nation, we remember that there were those who paid the ultimate sacrifice, who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. And I think especially, we don't talk about it enough, but there are very, very, very few countries where this type of freedom is available. There are Christians, as we know, meeting in churches all across the world today, even this morning, and we say, well, see, they're out there meeting as well, but do you realize many of them meet under the threat of persecution? They meet under maybe closed doors because they're afraid that they may be taken to jail for what they're doing. For many people, meeting together and expressing their faith in some public setting or worshiping together in this way, it could even cost them their lives. And we don't recognize sometimes just the freedom that we have in this country. Nobody this morning came to church worried that there might be a police car sitting in our parking lot ready to cart us off to jail. Nobody this morning worried that, we might have, to suffer repercussions from deciding to wake up and put on our Sunday best and be here in the church together this morning. None of us worried about that. And there's a reason for that. It's because our freedom was purchased. It was purchased through the many battles and wars and conflicts that we've endured as a nation. And of course, every one of them has cost different people, for various reasons, their lives. And so Memorial Day is important, not just because we as a nation have freedom, but because we as Christians have the freedom that so many others don't have. We need to recognize that, because that's important to us. And when we think about Memorial Day, some of you, I hope, will go and spend some time maybe remembering those that have gone before you. You'll go to the cemeteries. There'll be graveside services. There'll be parades tomorrow to recognize some of these things that have gone on before. And when we think about those maybe in your own past, those that you knew, grandparents or parents, or maybe even further back than that, you have memories of those people. And of course, some of them maybe have died recently, and maybe some of them died quite a long time ago. But nonetheless, their memories endure. And the cemeteries are full of people who had their own stories, who had their own lives. And in the context of what we're talking about this morning, many of them had their own faith as well. And this is what the writer of Hebrews talks about as we get into Hebrews chapter 11 and then into chapter 12. He spends some time to reflect upon the faith of those people who have gone before us. Hebrews 11, we didn't take the time to read it, but Hebrews 11 is sometimes referred to as the Hall of Faith, because the writer of Hebrews goes through many from the time of Enoch before the flood, through Abraham, through the many different martyrs and different judges. We talked about Joseph and Jacob. We talk about many many of those that were mentioned in the Bible who are identified as people that had faith. And they went and accomplished something, or they went and allowed their faith to be active in their life to an extent that it caused something to happen for the sake of God's kingdom, for the furthering of His work. And so if you read back through Hebrews 11, and I encourage you to do that, really what is the writer of Hebrews giving us? He's giving us a memorial to all of these people. Dozens and dozens of people, some that are named and some that are not named. And isn't that very similar to what we do at Memorial Day? Some of the people that gave their lives we know, and some we don't know. But the fact is, when we think about our heritage as a nation, we reflect on those that have gone before us. But when we reflect on our heritage as Christians, we need to take time to reflect on those people and their faith that have gone before us. Because there is something that's true about faith, and that is that faith endures. You notice that he says in chapter 1 of verse 12, "Wherefore we, seeing we are also compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses." And these witnesses are all of these people of faith that have gone before. Do you know that faith is mentioned over 22 times in chapter 11 alone? There's a lot to be said about faith, because the fact of the matter is buildings crumble, customs change, generations of people come and go, but faith has substance. Faith is something that endures. Faith is something that doesn't go away, and it gets passed down from one generation to another, and it's something that continues on. You know, when you think about the inheritance that maybe somebody left you, or maybe that you might leave someone else, maybe you have a fancy watch, or maybe you have a bank account full of money, or maybe you have a house that you're going to pass on down to the next generation. Do you realize that's well and good? That's a great inheritance. But all of that's going to go away. The house is not going to be there forever. The car is going to fall apart at some point. The money is going to run out. But do you realize the greatest inheritance that you can pass on is a faith that endures? It's the faith that you're living before them. And this is really what the writer of Hebrews is telling us, that faith is something that endures. In fact, Hebrews 11:1, he begins with that very statement. He says, "Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good report." Do you realize he's saying that faith is the only thing that's going to have substance, that's really going to matter, that we can pass on to the next generation? There's not a person here today that has come to Christ that can say you're born again that hasn't had that passed to them by somebody else. And maybe that somebody else is no longer with us. That heritage of faith continues because it's been passed on. Faith is something that endures. And so what does he tell us to do with this knowledge, with this background, with this understanding that all these people that have gone before us have passed something on to us? They're this cloud of witnesses he refers to. He gives us a couple of different things in these few verses that I want us to look on. And first of all, that it's appropriate for us to remember the faith of those in the past. It's appropriate for us to remember their faith. He says, "Wherefore, seeing we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses." He spent a whole chapter in the Bible reflecting on the faith of people that came before. He says, because of this, reflecting on their faith and understanding what it was, and really delving into the details of what kind of people they were, he says that is supposed to have a motivating effect on our own lives. He's saying, because of all these people that I've just laid out for you, there's something that you're going to be motivated to do. Hopefully have more sense of that this is important in life. It gives you some sense of what really matters. Now, the fact is, there are cultures, and hopefully we don't become one of them, that worship their ancestors. And we're not certainly promoting that, neither is the writer of Hebrews. Our ancestors weren't perfect. The people that he lays out in Hebrews chapter 11 weren't perfect. Was Abraham perfect? No. He was a friend of God, but he also did a lot of things wrong. Was Joseph perfect? Was Jacob perfect? Was all of these different people, did they do everything right? Absolutely not. But he says when we reflect on them, we reflect on the things that they were there to model for us in terms of their faith. We think about the things that they've achieved. We think about the areas that they have done the right thing. And we remember those things because it is the things that they've done that matter, that really are supposed to have an impact on how we're living today. And so we remember the faith of those in the past. And then secondly, we see, he says, wherefore, seeing we're compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, and the sin which doth so easily beset us. You see, we're not only supposed to remember that faith and say, oh, wasn't that good for them? He's saying we're supposed to model that faith in our own lives. He says, what's keeping you back, in other words, from having the kind of faith that I just laid out for you and those people? He says, you're looking at all these witnesses of people that had faith. He says, what is it that's holding you back from living with that same kind of faith? You need to lay aside every weight. Do you know that weight holds us down? It makes us unable to or free to do what we normally would want to do. In the case of our Pine Car Derby that we had a few weeks ago, everybody was really concerned about weight because every car has to be exactly the right weight, right? But you know that there comes a point, you have this weight on this car, the more weight you have, it makes it go faster down the hill. But you know that if you had to put that same car back up the hill, you don't want more weight, you want less. And the fact is, faith sometimes is an uphill climb. And so what does Paul say? Lay aside the weight that's going to hold you back. Don't allow yourself to be brought down by the things that are going to hold you back. You know, speaking of cars, think about your cars today versus the cars of the 1950s. It's Memorial Day. Think back to your classic cars, right? They were made of steel, heavy steel. Bumpers were made out of solid chrome or whatever they were made out of, right? These cars were heavy cars, right? And you know what they did? They knew how to burn a lot of gas. In today's culture, I'm not sure how those cars would fare. You have to be a millionaire to buy enough gasoline to keep them running. But you know what they've learned? They've learned that cars that they build more lightweight, cars that have, plastic and all that other stuff they put in them today. I don't even know what it is. Carbon fiber, I guess they're going to someday. But nonetheless, the weight matters because they get more gas mileage. They're more efficient. We build cars better today than we did in the 1950s. Now, you could say we don't have the same style. We're missing some of that. But the fact is, they are cars that are designed to run. Why? Because they inherently have less weight. And do you know, as Christians, sometimes we allow lots of things to weigh us down. Sometimes they're just internal things. There are cares. There are frustrations. There are burdens. There are inhibitions. They are things that we've just allowed to affect us. And they've kept us back. They've weighed us down. They've made us ineffective at really living out the faith that we should be living for the Lord. And so what does he say? Don't allow those things to weigh you down. Don't allow yourself to be prevented from achieving all that God wants from you as you live out your faith. Lay aside every weight, he says. And then he says, also lay aside the sin which doth so easily beset us. You know, sin is a weight in and of itself. Sin will ultimately destroy us in the end. It will hold us back, though, in the meantime. And sin also ruins our testimony. As I said, we look back at Hebrews 11, and you think of some of these characters. You know that Samson, is in the Hall of Faith. When we think of the story of Samson, I mean, many of us think, man, what a failure. What a guy that did everything wrong. Married the wrong woman, gave up the secrets he shouldn't have given, ended up with his eyes poked out and, grinding at a millstone. I mean, he just seemed like he did it all wrong. But do you know, the writer of Hebrews says, yeah, he did a lot of things wrong, but the fact is, he also had faith. Faith is what God rewarded in his life. Faith is what made sure that he had a future with the Lord. But sin is something that destroyed him, and it destroyed his testimony. He did the wrong thing, and that's true for us as well. We as Christians, we need to be blameless. The Bible says we need to have a testimony before our own families, before our church families, before our co-workers, before our culture. That is something that they have nothing that they can point their finger at. Because there's nothing that those that know us like to do more than to say, see, I told you they're a hypocrite. They talk a good talk. They might go to church. They go give their money. They go do their things. But you know what? I know some dirty little secrets about them. I know a few things. And if you knew what I knew, you would know that it's not a real thing. The fact is, sin not only destroys you as a person, it destroys your ability to pass the faith that you hold dear on to those around you. Because if you can be identified as someone who's living a dual life, you will very quickly be taken out of the running as someone they will look to for faith. So don't allow your faith to be beset by sin, as he says. Instead, he says, what do we do? He says, let us run with patience the race that is set before us. I think sometimes our emphasis as we read this verse is not always the intention that's meant. We tend to put so much emphasis on running the race, which is true. We have a race. But do you see who the race is for? He says, let us run with patience the race that is set before us. He's saying this as in opposition to them. He says, these folks have already run their race. I just went through a chapter full of people. They've all run their race. They're all done. It's past tense for them. But for us, sitting here, living here today, we have a race of faith that's set before us to run. And it's important for us that we recognize, number one, we don't live or try to relive the lives of other people. Their race was theirs. How they lived, how they did, whatever happened in the past is the past. And we need to be able to put those things behind us. But what do we have to do? We have to realize that the circumstances, the people, the culture that we've been placed in, they all are components of the race that we've been called to run. Now, we can sit around and bellyache as to why we don't have enough money, or our friends aren't good enough to us, or our family has, done us wrong in certain ways, or this or that. And we can talk about all these things, but the fact is, those are the circumstances that God has put in your life. And He's put them in your life so that you might find a way to show and demonstrate what a Christian does with those types of circumstances. You think all those people in the Hall of Faith had it all easy? They didn't. They had their own challenges. They had their own struggles. They had their own difficulties to deal with. And they had to find a way to allow their faith to shine through in the circumstances they were given, to run their race. But do you know, we have to do the same thing. Instead of complaining about our circumstances or saying, boy, if only things were different, I could do this or that. The fact is, we need to recognize these are the circumstances God's given me. And He's called me to run the race that I have before me right now. Do you realize that we will only be judged for the things that we have or haven't done with our own faith? When we stand before the Lord, but when we stand before that judgment seat of Christ, he won't say, well, do you remember these other people? Yeah? Well, I'm going to judge you for them. No, he's going to look at us. He's going to say, I gave you these circumstances in life. I gave you these resources to work with. I gave you these talents. I gave you this church family to be a part of. I gave you these families to touch. I gave you this co-workers to be a part of. And do you know what? You did or you didn't live your faith in an effective way with what I've given you. That's what we are judged by. We have to recognize our judgment is not based on other people. We have to run the race that is set before us. And do you realize when faith is real in our lives, it will transform how we are living out our faith. We will not be allowing ourselves to be weighed down with other things. We will be working to get rid of that sin that so easily besets us. And we will begin to develop a vision in our own lives for what God wants to do in us. Have you ever taken stock, just stepped back and said, you know, the Lord's given me these circumstances. He's given me this money. He's given me this family. He's put me in this place. And then said, now, what does God expect me to do with my life given what he's given me? And ask yourself that question. I mean, we shouldn't just be keeping pace every day. We shouldn't just be treading water. If God's put all these things in your life, he wants you to have a vision for how he expects you to live out your faith effectively within the circumstances you've been given. And when we do that, and when we move forward with the vision that we believe God's given us in terms of how to live our faith in the circumstances we have, when that race of life comes to an end, we can be assured of one thing. He will look at us and say, well done, good and faithful servant. Well, let's look at the second verse. We have to keep moving. So we see that we are to remember the faith of those in the past, and we're to model the faith of those in the past for the sake of us in the present. But finally, and I think maybe this is the most important point that's laid out in verse 2, he says, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Recognize that the power in our faith is not in ourselves. The power of living a life of faith, or to live a life of faith, comes only from Jesus Christ. What does he say? It may be easy to look back in the past. I just gave you a whole list here in Hebrews 11 and say, boy, they had the faith. I just need to emulate them. No, that's not what he's saying. He says, if you're going to have a life of faith, if you're going to run this race that is set before you, he says, you need to not just find the good examples in the past of those that have gone before you. You need to know that you need to look to the greatest example there is, and that is Jesus Christ. And while we might have a great cloud of witnesses that might help to motivate us or remember, those things that they've done and how they've lived it out, we have to always remember that our strength only comes from the Lord. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Do you realize that he is the author of our faith? We may have heard the gospel from someone, and they may have shared with us how we could come to Christ and shared with us how we needed to accept him and be born again. But do you realize that the one who wrote the book on faith and what faith is to be is Jesus Christ? Because faith always and only begins with Jesus. Before him, it was a blank page. There was no sense of faith. What could we have faith in without Christ? There would be nothing. Our faith is in him, and we would have nothing to have faith in if it weren't for him being the author of it. He wrote the book. But not only did he write the book as the author, he continues to work in and through us and will complete it. Because it says, he's not only the author of our faith, he's the finisher of our faith as well. And the finish line is yet to come. Our faith will one day come to an end. Because faith, what does it say? We just read in Hebrews 11:1. It's the substance of things hoped for. It's that we're looking forward to. Our faith is what we need to live out today, but it's something that's a hope that's coming in the future. And that hope is all wrapped up in Jesus Christ. Our faith will one day end with Him. As I said, we will one day be judged and rewarded for Him based on our faith. He will one day take these imperfect, sin-laden, weighted down bodies and He will make us perfect before Him. This is the promise of faith. He will take the mortality that we constantly live with. The fact that there's cemeteries full of people always reminds us at Memorial Day that mortality is waiting for everyone. Death is there. But do you realize the hope of faith is we don't have to fear death? That's why the Bible says, "O death, where is thy sting?" There's no sting of death for the one that lives by faith, because mortality may be something that we have to face, but it's not for long, because we'll have an eternity with our Savior in Jesus Christ. This is the great hope, the great power of our faith. He's the finisher of our faith. He's going to make those things that are wrong right. And He's not going to just do that for us as individuals. He's going to do that for our entire world. We look at the political problems. You look at the fighting in the Middle East. You look at all the conflict we have in the world today. You look at all of the disputes that are out there. Do you realize that one day everyone, every knee will bow before Jesus Christ? One day He will set all of these things right. We need to not just reflect on the past or dwell in the present of what's going on. We need to remember our faith has a hope in a future. A future that's powered by Jesus Christ. He's going to finish this faith. He's going to turn that faith that we're hoping for into the substance that we believe it is. It all comes through Jesus Christ. And when we do those things, we do some things not just for us, we do some things for those around us as well. Because just as we look back in the past to those that have gone before, and hopefully you can identify some in your own life who have been people that have lived out their faith, that have demonstrated what it means to be a Christian, what it means to really live for the Lord. Hopefully you can think of those examples, and as you think about that through this Memorial Day, that you'll look back and you'll say, they were a model for me in this area. You know, it seems like the stereotypical thing is there's always some grandmother somewhere that was this prayer warrior, right? Why is it always the grandmas that are the prayer warriors? Where's the grandfathers who are the prayer warriors? But nonetheless, you have the grandmother somewhere who's the prayer warrior. And do you realize sometimes that can motivate you to be, maybe, who's today's prayer warriors? Who are the ones today who are picking up this mantle of faith and saying, hey, I'm going to be a prayer warrior for the things that are going on today? Let's not allow these practices that we revere in the past to die out. We need to look back to some of these folks and say, this was what this person meant to me. Who means that today? Who's living that today? Maybe that's something I need to pick up. You know, the fact is we can be motivated in great ways by the people of the past. And we don't do it just for our own sake. We do it because someday, 100 years from now, we want someone to remember something about us. And you know, they're not going to remember just, you know, oh, well, they lived in a big house or they worked here or there. I can tell you, I do a lot of genealogical research for my own family and for things in the area and whatever. But one of the things that you often don't find is you might know when they were born or died, or you find some little facts and tidbits here. But it's very hard to find information about who these people really were. I'm going to share with you as we close something very personal to me that goes back over 180 years. It was a letter written by a man named David Byer. Now, my name is David Byer Donnelly. My great-grandmother's maiden name was Byer, and that's how I was named, but this letter goes back to August 23rd of 1839. And this was my great-great-great-grandfather, who was named David Byer. And I don't know much about him. I've done some research. I've been to his grave. I can tell you his tombstone is barely readable, and it's in a cemetery that's all overgrown and not taken care of anymore. And I can tell you that his house is long gone. Any of his business ventures are no longer anywhere to be found. There's not a lot to know about them, but here's what I want you to hear. This was near the end of his life, and he's writing, this is an open letter to his children and to his grandchildren. And towards the end of his life, he had nearly 100 descendants already. So he had quite a family, quite a big family. And in fact, probably there's a number of people in Tyrone area who are related to him as well. But nonetheless, he grew up he's buried out near Tipton and spent a lot of time here in this area, Tyrone area. And this is what he writes. He says, "It is with great weakness and trembling of body and mind that I undertake to write a few lines to you once more in the land of the living, hoping that you will make every allowance for the manner and state in which I address you. This, I think, you will be willing to do when I inform you of my rapid decline of life. I am now within 15 days of 76 years old, and for the last 10 months mostly confined to bed with afflictions and infirmities of old age. The first 2 weeks of this month there was no hopes of my living many days, but past every expectation I have gotten much better. But I am continually troubled with a deep-rooted cough from which I can get no relief. Now as I am getting," he writes more of the letter, and he just gets into this point towards the end. He says, "Now as I'm getting tired of the pen and of sitting, and have not said one word about how we are getting along in the divine life, lest you should think that our abundant crops might make us forget God, I would say of myself, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Although I am not sure out of the reach of temptations yet, I have confidence in the Lord and believe that he who has done so many great things for me hitherto will not cast me off, nor forsake in my old age, nor suffer me to be tempted above that which he will enable me to bear. My daily prayer is, Lord, thy will be done. It is my daily prayer also that the Lord would convert and save all my children to the latest generation." He goes and talks about some of his family members specifically. And then he says, bid fair to become useful and worthy members. So far we're preaching every Sunday afternoon and prayer and class meetings every Sunday. And sometime in the week, my daughter-in-law is leader. Continue there. He says, "This is likely to be the last time that I shall write to you. This letter is designed for you all. I shall be happy to hear from you all, as I cannot expect to see your faces any more in the world. So no more. My best respects to you all from your affectionate parent and well-wisher, David Byer." Now, as again, I don't know much about him, but I can tell you one thing. The most important thing that was on his mind as he was on his deathbed was that an open letter be written to his descendants so that they might know of his faith and that they might, as he says, be converted to know them, to the last of his generations. And that's a testament. It's a testament to say, I've tried to live a life of faith, and it's my greatest thing to pass on is to be that faith to the next generation. When we think about our Memorial Day, and you go out into the cemeteries and you remember those that have gone before you, think about those who have carried that torch of faith, who have modeled something for you, who have run that race and are now past the race for themselves. And then ask yourself what it is that I'm passing on to the next generation. We are to have a memorial to move to them as they one day may look at us. 180 years from now, will we be remembered for our faith and for our desire that our loved ones know the Lord?